Hi, it's me, Joan, Mainline Sociology. This class, I guess, call it a class, um, is for teachers only. I'd like teachers to think about the system that they're in. I happen to be privy to some information that I'll share first, and then we'll talk about um, where all this money goes and how you're being asked to perform in a job. So, as I mentioned in my coming out video, um, I was raised up by some people who were very high up in industries. And in this specific case, my father was a postdoc fellow at Mellon Institute as a biochemist. And the fellows at Carnegie were sometimes addressed by a man named David Rockefeller. And my father was always telling me about his job because I was always asking what was going on. And in one particular address to the fellows, Rockefeller laid out his plan for education. And I wrote down a couple of bullet points from what I remember. Now, what I remember and now what has been, studied and it's all out there. And I think you're gonna, say, yeah, oh yeah, that's what's happened. Remember, I'm talking about in 1965. Excuse me, 1965, long time ago. I don't remember there being any dinosaurs, but they used to teach that fossil fuels came from them, and I knew that was wrong because my dad was a biochemist. Totally separate story. So, Rockefeller addressed the fellows and laid out his plans for education. And if I had a board, I'd write the notes, but I already wrote notes. Bullet points: centralized power and control. And this by meaning every single school in the whole entire country that was under this district or the DOE, however you want to look at it, they would have the same textbooks. Their teachers would be trained up in the same way. There would be a strict hierarchy, meaning the students were the subordinates and the teachers being the authority. So there would be no challenges to what the material in the textbooks was saying by the students. And everyone can remember being a student and knowing that that was just crap, and you're raising your hand, you're like, and they're like, shut up. Not all schools are like that. My son went to a school, and when he was in fourth grade, and they were learning about chemistry, and he said, "No, it's kind of like this," and the teacher's like, "Oh, I don't know." She went home, she studied, she came back. Yes, you are correct, sir. Okay, so there is a parallel education, or there was a parallel education system separate from this, where input and learning was going on, but not in this Rockefeller plan. So we have centralized power and control. We have what you call unified estate. All right. And this was sold to the public as something good. Across the board, across the country, in every single school, all the children will be learning the same thing at the same pace. They will be segregated by age. They will go through the process and learn bit by bit. Everybody's the same. That's how it was sold to the public. But behind the scenes, I'll get to that in a minute about where these ideas came from. But behind the scenes, it's the perfect way to control the dissemination of information. So everybody's thinking the same. Nobody's going off the rails and thinking, hey, there might be a better way of doing this, or maybe we didn't come from monkeys, or whatever it is that you might think, okay? Strict entry requirements. And this means for the teachers. So while the curricula was being created and controlled by this centralized power, okay, that didn't become the DOE for a few decades, or a decade, but suffice to say, we want teachers that will go along with this program. So the credentialing process, or the educational process for teachers, was also very controlled, because we don't want teachers reading the textbooks going, hey, that's not right. I served on textbook committee. I can speak to that situation and how it's dealt with. It's not a day off to go serve on a textbook committee, but it might as well be, because you have to check your brain at the door. That's an aside. So we have strict entry requirements for the teachers, and we have a controlled curricula for the students that the teachers have no say over, and they have learned through the credentialing process, or the process of their higher education, to be obedient to what it says in the textbooks. We have, so that's the certification process. Also, what goes along with that are brotherhood organizations. One of the bullet points that was set. So brotherhood organizations, meaning there would be a cost to the teacher for the privilege of doing the job. And most of you teachers know this as your union dues. When you get hired on as a teacher, you do have a choice. They say, do you want to belong to the union? Then it's, I don't know how much it is now, but it's $50 a month to belong to the union. Well, do I have to belong to the union? No, you don't have to belong to the union. Then it's only $49 a month. So you have a choice. So why not, for the extra buck, join the union, right? Okay. So that type of affiliation is a requirement. So as far as, before we talk about unions for a little bit, we'll go through, okay, unified estate, strict entry requirements, certification, brotherhood affiliation. Inside the curricula, he said to the fellows in 1965, the primary objectives here are to remove God. So there'll be no talking about God in schools. And I suppose back then is like, okay, fine, because I already teach my child about God, and we have our faith and we do our thing. So I don't really want the schools messing around with that. So that was an easy sell, but it was a very high level point. remove US history. So instead of learning about our representative republic, all right, they started using words like, we're a democracy, that's it. Now think about what happened to, King Edward in 1615 or whatever, European history and all that, that became, what was taught, not our Constitution. So ixnay on that. And since I explain our constitutional republic in 5 minutes, I'll just go ahead and do that because a lot of teachers actually don't know. It's such a great idea. So, we have little communities. In our little communities, we would vote. We would elect someone, anyone that we thought might represent our communities, and we'd send them up to the state government. Not a real high paying job or anything, but just go there and say, my little community wants this. If they're doing anything to mess with that, try to stop it. Then out of those states, right, the people who were chosen, right, chose someone to haul themselves off to Washington to make sure that that state was represented in Washington. It wasn't supposed to be even a big deal then, right? And if they were messing around, it's like they'd say, get back here. We don't, you're not doing your job. You're out of here. Okay. Really, it's a brilliant way of doing things. It's there's more to it, but I mean, you could explain that to a fifth grader and have a little constitutional republic of your own in your school or family. I mean, it really is a good idea, and that idea has been erased, and it was on purpose in 1964. End of story. So next bullet point, obedience and order. And when you say obedience and order, when he said obedience and order, he wasn't talking about just in the classroom, like you have to raise your hand or you have to sit in your assigned seat or you get a 5-minute water break or you get a 20-minute recess. But that's how it's structured, right? That's true still today, right? And it's very unnatural for children, but don't make me go off the bullet points that he's saying. I'm not supposed to be arguing them now. I'm supposed to be pointing out obedience and order. So there's obedience and order in the classroom, but that's not the end of the bullet point. There's obedience and order for teachers to administrators, right? You know what I'm talking about there. And then don't forget, we already have the Brotherhood organization managing a big pile of money that people kind of forget about. And I know about what happened to union contracting in California too, from an old sage that I used to talk to after my classes. Anyway, so we have centralized power and control, unified estate, strict entry requirements, union dominance of curricula, okay? Union meaning we're not talking about the actual union, but we're talking about the unified curricula across the country. Obedience and order, and that is, you're in a bureaucracy. Your power is coming from your position, not your ability to do your job. All right? I'm the teacher, so I say when you can go to the bathroom. I'm the teacher, so you better answer these questions correctly or you're going to make me look bad. All right. Or I'm the administrator and I'm not going to stand for a teacher who fill in the blank. So there's this strict pecking order and people obey it, not because they like the person so much or they think the person is so good at their job or so much smarter. It's because of a position. Okay. That's very clear in 1964 by Rockefeller to the fellows. Next bullet point, time focused. What that means is that time directs learning. Okay, we have 5 minutes to cover what the color red is, or whatever, or what a classification for a mammal is versus a reptile. We have 5 minutes. Everybody better get it in 5 minutes or an hour or a week or whatever that time is, but that's all you get. There's not discussion. There's not, I wonder, is there a fungus kingdom? Isn't that like more important? Or how do the trees all work together? If you have questions, it's tough. It's all in there already. So time focused. You get there on time. You sit in your classroom, which was another bullet point, is that we're having places to sit that are uncomfortable, places to sit if you're bad, right? There's a penal system. If somebody's talking out of turn, it's like you're going to go to the principal's office, or you're going to, all those things are in place already. Strict obedience to authority. Okay. Here's a really interesting one that changed, that has to do with why we're so confused about what science is. Site-based learning. If you can't see it, in other words, it doesn't exist. All right, so go back to what is science. They say, oh, okay, science is observing and measuring some set of variables or a variable or whatever, right? Where's the built-in assumption? The best way to know things is by observation. All right, no other way. I mean, it's a good way. It's a good way. It's good to observe. Very good. But because of this curricula laid out in 1964 and the adherence to power in the position and not the person, all of a sudden, if a position says they observed, then that makes it so. Well, that goes against what science is. Science is not a private thing. The idea of observation is, okay, I believe you that you observed that. I really do. I believe you're saying you're telling me the truth. But I don't have to believe them because I can observe too, right? I can do the exact same experiment. There's nothing that a high-level scientist can do that I can't do, right? If this interaction happens when I put, baking soda and vinegar together, if somebody tells me, hey, if you do that, it's gonna like make all these bubbles and stuff, I'm like, no way. And they're like, yeah, we'll try it. Oh, it did. Hey, okay. You see the difference? We're sold a lot of things based on someone else saying it. We know we can do it too because we can see it. It's an empirical site-based learning, right? But we don't do the experiment. And we don't follow the evidence for the most part. Unless you're a sociologist and you're like, oh, there's all this evidence, or there's the lack of evidence. Both things can be true. Okay, so site-based learning, continuity of of curriculum, publishing lesson plans, consistency of outcome. All right. At this age, you have to learn this. At this age, you have to learn that. Now, when you're getting a lesson plan as a teacher, and all teachers get this, even in college, we have a list in sociology. You bet your students better know all of these words and all of these concepts by the end of this class. They don't really care how you get there. That was the fun part, right? Just so they know these things. But in primary schools where it's more controlled, you better know these things. And you've heard about, national tests and teachers who only teach to the test, not we don't care if they learn, we care if they memorized, right? When you memorize, you quickly lose it. What's interesting about that as a little diatribe, when we compare public schools to private schools and the methods by which they prepare students for testing, they're very different. In private schools, they don't talk about, oh, there's going to be this test and you're going to have to pass, or you're going to make me look bad, or you're going to make our whole school look bad, or whatever. They just teach what they do, and they say, oh, you take this test and everybody does it, around the country. And do you know those students do it? The performance of these schools is so much better than other schools. And there's a lot of social psychology. Maybe we'll get to that. But you understand as a teacher that, I don't care how stupid it is as a teacher. I got passed down this lesson plan or this video or whatever, and by golly, that's what they're going to learn. And if they don't learn it, and if they don't pay attention, I'm going to send them to the principal, or I'm going to make them stay after school, or they're going to get kicked out of school, or whatever. You have a whole penal system on your side, for that. So he also said that these standards, right, the standards in 1964, when they started, are very different from the standards today. And he said that will be a gradual process. And by virtue of this design, my dad actually told me the goal is to confuse people enough so they would not like learning. A lot of people, once you get out of school, it's like, I'm out of school, tear up my books, run away, right? To take that joy out of learning, just kind of makes you mad. So the goal being functional illiteracy. Okay, so that plan was out in 1964, and it was a very detailed plan. And should you want to remain a fellow and get a position, a higher level position in industry, or move on, or teaching, you were to follow that plan, because it's the same thing at that level. Even though you're a postdoc, you might have a PhD, whatever, your position you could get placed in a higher learning situation. All right, so that's a plan. And the question you should be asking yourself right now is, hey, how come they had this plan that's been now 60 years in the making to the end of it, right? And how come they had it all already? Why? Why Pittsburgh? Why at Mellon Institute? What's Carnegie Mellon got to do with it? Well, this is where my actual experience comes in. I believe what my father said. Why wouldn't I? And you can, research this yourself. But this sort of a plan did not necessarily come from the United States. It was actually a plan of Germany and how the Nazis operated. Well, Pittsburgh had a whole bunch of German scientists. And how do I know that? Well, I went to an experimental school. At the same time that they were unifying public schools, they were also running these, what you call experiential schools. And I went to one of these. Well, I loved school. We got to learn about every culture there was. As kindergarten, every kindergarten to second grade, every day was celebrating a holiday of some culture. We were always learning about each other, and the people in my class were not all this, I mean, I didn't even know that we were different, but there were lighter people from China, people from Hungary, people from Germany. I was from the United States, people from Africa, people with, darker skin, lighter skin, Chinese, Japanese. I wish I had my picture of my kindergarten, first and second grade to show you. That it I just didn't There wasn't such a word as diversity. We were all children, we were all interested, we all put on plays, um, we learned about the world, and they also introduced us to concepts like UNICEF. um, we were slowly being taught, and this I learned this later when I hit public schools, but we were slowly being taught that we had so much food and we had such a high level of living, and these other countries didn't. Well, talk about a fourth grader calling BS on a teacher, right? I had seen the beautiful cultures of these other places. Why are they telling me their disadvantages? It was a nightmare for me. But let's get back to you as a teacher. I'm being myself. I'm trying to be as honest as I can with you about, to bring in who I am too, which is not easy. All right. Because there's a lot I learned way back then. Okay. So now think about what you do and how you do it. I have talked to teachers. I know what goes on in the classroom. Why? Because I watch. And that 32-second video that changed my life was just evidence that why I had to change my strategy, show you who I am, not trying to teach you, the whole entire Marx in a glance or Max Weber. I'm showing you the real plans and where they came from. Now let's make it about you. What about your AFT? How much do you know about your local and how much money they have and where they invest this money? All right. So how much do you know about the Department of Education, or the DOE? Did you know that they have other offshoots like the MLA, to change words, to edit textbooks, to confound reading, right? When I go back to my experimental school, I was taught to read in a way that is so cumbersome. And I'm going to go into that specifically. But that was a test. Children by the age of 4 will learn to read naturally. There's no such thing as honestly teaching people to read. when you're, as you know, as a teacher, the younger you start speaking various languages to students, the more they'll learn. They'll learn every language, and that enriches a person. So what does the unified school, they say, oh no, we don't teach languages in kindergarten. And I know, because I thought, hey, what's so bad about going to kindergarten? They'll speak Spanish, they'll speak English, they'll be bilingual in no time. Well, no, it's not what they do. And that's another long story of how I tried to change that along with another woman. And we both withdrew our students out of school when we went against that school board 20 years ago. Okay, and our school was a one district school. I mean, we had one school, one school board, and trying to change that one thing. Let the children speak to each other. No, they didn't want that. So coming from both sides of the fence, my child as an English speaker and her child as a Spanish speaking, they both knew a little bit of the other one, but if they could have spoken together, they would have picked it up in no time. You know what I'm talking about. But back to the AFT. What property do they own? Where do they invest your money? Now, here's some homework for you, okay? If you're a California teacher, you will be able to find out that the LA Unified School Districts actually held the insurance policy on the Twin Towers in New York. And when they were destroyed, that insurance payout was substantial. I'm sure you didn't get a cut of that in your paycheck, but you look that up yourself. Who collected it? The other piece of homework that I'd like you to do is look up Enron. And some of you may remember the Enron scandal and how it affected the supposed pool of teachers' retirement money. So Enron and the housing crisis of 2008 is something that you can look into, and you'll find it in California, at least as I did. There are some correlations there that shouldn't shock you. And remember, this is your money. This is money that you're paying every month for the privilege of doing your job. And you believe that at some point in the future, you will see the benefit of that, right? And you also probably believe that the people who are serving on union committees are acting in your best interest. Well, another thing I did was try to serve on a union committee meeting and to see what their interest was. And maybe you have too. And those are stories that are good stories, right? Because we all want to improve the conditions of our jobs, and we all want to improve the learning abilities in our students. And these are just a couple of roadblocks. But money talks, right? Where is your money? And how much is it? Add up how much your union dues are and find out what that money is going into is a very interesting inquiry. And because as we know, teachers are very good learners. And the more you learn about your job, the better you'll be able to do it. So find that out. Do you know exactly what's in your contract? I didn't, so I read it. And since I had a background in legalese a little bit, this was, wish I had a copy of it, because I don't think there's a word for it. But what's in your contract? And you might think, oh, my contract says that, I pay union dues, um, and I have to work X number of hours, and I'm going to have performance. You might think about the things that you actually encounter, but if you really read that contract, read what's in it and read what's not in it, you may be surprised. Is it for control? How much does it control you? Is it for confusion? Is it for diffusion? Like, I care about that there's 6 days off at winter break, not 7 or something like that. That is a point that's argued. Class size is another variable that they make it seem like you may have some sort of control over it. No. And now that goes with demographics. If you have a certain amount of people ready for school, that's how many people you're going to get. Okay. If there's a decline in births, you'll get less. And now, as you know, we have in the LAUSD, we're down. The report, I think I heard 30% because people are pulling their children out because of the draconian requirements in school and the non learning. So, if you want to keep your job, you got to get some, their customers and you're losing them, right? And that means your job. It might not seem like, well, I have a contract and it doesn't matter how many students come here, I'll still have a job. That's not the way it works. So are your obligations to your job, which is the classroom, or is your obligation to the union contract? Now, something to think about, because if you went and say, which I have, which I did just for fun, I do a lot of things for fun that other people wouldn't find fun. I had figured out how much money I paid in union dues one day, and I went down to the AFT and I said, I've put in 2,000 broke as or something, I put in $3,000 or whatever it was, 3,000 some odd dollars, and I need that. I need a loan or I need the money. And the guy looked at me like, what? What are you talking about? And I said, well, I paid it in. Are you going to do something for me? Are you going to help me? I mean, my husband did, long story. But I don't think you're going to be able to recover that money. I'm just, and you're probably thinking, oh, she's crazy. It's not going to work. It's an example of how little control you have. You signed the contract, you kiss that money goodbye, and dollars to donuts, you don't know what that pool of money is doing. And that is a big, big area for exploration, and one that will open your eyes. And it doesn't take very long to find that out. Now, let's talk about your salary. You probably get, I mean, can you pay someone enough to be a teacher? It's hard to say. When I was teaching, I mean, you have to love what you do, because you're really not in there for money. There's so many other things that come up, right? There's, you can tell a student sitting there after class and with their head hanging down. You're not going to, as a teacher, walk out of that building. I mean, I didn't. And I sat with students and I learned about a lot more about the system too, because they were troubled and many different things. Okay, let's talk about how much of a cut you get. Now, I just looked it up, and because I used to do this for my classes, because people have to pay for college, so it was really easy for me to count how many students I had, how much they paid, and then I figured out what, the system was collecting, and I knew how much money I made, right? So you've probably done the same thing. Well, okay, so funding allocated for students, and since it's been so long since I've done this work, I looked it up. And in the Los Angeles Unified School Districts, so California and other states wouldn't be too far away from that, funding per student per year is between $16,000 and $24,000. Okay, so in your classroom, say you have 30 students. Let's say it's $20,000. What, right? Just so it's easy. That means that every year, if you have 30 students, that your school is getting $600,000. Okay, $600,000 for you to be there, for you to tell your students or do whatever you're going to do. Okay, so what percent of that money do you get? I don't think teachers make $600,000 a year. Maybe you make $60,000 a year, right? Which is, I don't know. I don't know. I didn't look it up, and there's a scale, and it depends on how long you've been there and so on and so forth, right? But even if you make $60,000 a year, where does the rest of that money go? That's a lot more money. Okay, so the building that you're in is probably, bought and paid for a long time ago, or what I see around here as they're basically railroad, containers with holes cut in them and yucky desks, and your students have to buy their own pencils and crayons, or you buy them out of your salary. All right, there's no excuse for that. Okay, but we're still talking about what? Let's say you make $100,000, so we're still talking about $500,000 that seems to be MIA. Does it cost $500,000 to feed your students 2 meals a day? $500,000 a year to feed that class? No. Your buildings are paid for. Doesn't cost that much money for food. Got the administrators' salaries. Maybe could you look into your school and find out if that adds up? Or maybe there's a little bit of extra money there too, and you don't know where that's going. But it's the easiest thing to do is to follow the money. Okay, so that's all I'm bringing out for you, and that is your homework. Just, where are my union dues going? What are they being used for? Where are the publishing rights for the books that I'm getting? If you even get books anymore, a lot of stuff is coming on digital, which costs nothing. Are your students getting supplies? Are they getting fed? Add all those things up. Add your civil servant, populate that would, do they call them civil servant class anymore? It's the civil staff, meaning the counselor or the secretary, so on. All right. Now, a lot of schools are hiring police officers. We have community policing. That's a big issue coming up, and I hope they get paid too. But you can actually follow the money. But the main part of this that I want you to understand, and I hear this complaint from teachers, oh yeah, I love my job, but my students are a bunch of chimpanzees who can't read and I can't control them. Nothing breaks my heart worse. I heard that from college professors as well. This is about control of your classroom, right? That's a whole other topic. Nobody ever talked out of turn in my classes. Nobody ever, well, I can't say they didn't turn in their, paper sometimes late or whatever, but they were sorry. They wanted to be there. They wanted to learn because it was a choice. It was college. It was easier to get them to pay attention, but still some college teachers have given up because their students can't read. Instead of helping them to learn to read better or write better, they just give up and here's the video, answer the questionnaire, school's out early. There's a lot of that going on at the college level too. So to look around, conformity without involvement is submission. This is something this is a principle of social science and social psychology and all of that. If you're conforming, there's nothing wrong with conforming to standards that you are involved in creating and agree with. But our education system, as you have seen, is totally controlled by a centralized situation. Sure, there's a rogue well, they captured the homeschool too, but there was a thriving homeschool community with alternative learning at the primary level in California before it was captured by this online free learning, which was cemented during COVID. But so we did have that, and we do still have private schools, but most of them are closed now because they just they couldn't afford not to go out of work. So, and I also want to mention, as far as money in the private schools, parents would pay for the class. They didn't get federal funding, right? And it was about $7,000 a year. The teachers were paid a little bit less than public school teachers, not too much less, but a little bit less, but they also had the opportunity to teach. Okay, so how come a private school can rent a building, have a custodian, have a beautiful lunch program with healthy foods and choices, teachers who are interested in actually teaching, all for $6,000 a year or $6,500 a year, and a public school needs between $16,000 and $20,000 to operate, and the outcomes are far below those of private schools. These are questions you might want to ask yourself. And I'm not trying to say that you're doing a bad job. That's not this at all. It's just that I want you to understand your job, what's going into creating the environment for that job. So you want to look at your union investments. Your local district will be able to provide you with a list of what they do with your union dues. Okay, so that's easy. And every single local is going to have different accounts. Okay, you're going to find out ballpark the salaries, ballpark the salaries involved in getting this service of education delivered to your students. I'm not haven't run the numbers on every single school district, right? But you can run the numbers on yours and get a ballpark. I can guarantee you that there's going to be a surplus, or there's going to be a question in your mind. Yeah, where is that money going? Because remember, the USDA is involved too. They're providing food in your kitchen. So you don't have to take the $4.50 or whatever it costs to feed a child every lunch, okay? That doesn't even have to count because that's a separate budget. All right, so food for thought. If we're going to teach our children the joy of learning, it would be a good idea, in my mind, to understand, A, there was a plan that if you go through it, bullet point by bullet point, you'll think, that's a little bit sinister. And since I wrote it down, I will show that to you so you can have your notes and think about your job and think about, what if you got $24,000 or $20,000 for students and you had an area shared with another teacher? You know about learning on multiple levels, that you could be a facilitator, and maybe thinking about getting the federal government to fund that kind of thing. Or President Trump had an idea of, let's give this federal money to the parents, right? To the parents, and then they could decide where they're going to educate their child. And that is happening. And you as a teacher, especially in a public school, are going to want in on that, right? Because despite the bureaucracy, despite the lowering standard, despite all the drugs that have been given to children, and so to make them, that's another issue. To manage a population like that is I can't even imagine, no picnic. But imagine being a teacher in an environment and the wealth, the literal wealth, not a $60,000 a year salary that relies on you doing A, B, C, D, and yelling at your students if you can't get it to go to the principal. No, it would be, we have a whole new world. We can teach empiricism. We can learn the real physics. We can develop human skills in children. And you get to do that and make a heck of a lot more money. That sounds good. And that's kind of the logical conclusion that you'll come to when you just do this little bit of work. Okay, you mean my union dues went to pay for insurance on the Twin Towers, and then the Twin Towers were exploded down, and they collected all this, this huge billions of dollars. And what did they do with that? What else are they insuring? What else are they investing in? Okay, so we have, here you go. Here's your homework. I don't know if you could see it. I don't have a board, but there, Enron, and then your bullet points of the Rockefeller plan for education. I'll put that down, and I don't know how this works. And I'm sure everyone in the world is better at technology than I am. But for teachers only, Joan out.